Everyone, welcome to React Advanced tutorial. In this tutorial we will talk about i18n or internationalization and how we change the language in our application. So what we learned, first we will learn what is internationalization, what is i18n that we talk about, and how do we change the language in our application. Okay, here's the final product that we will learn how to build after this tutorial. We have some text inside of our application and we have a translation button right above here. And when I click on it, you'll see the languages that are listed, and currently it's on English, so I can just switch it to Farsi and you'll see it change the language for me. If I can go back and switch to English, let's learn how to. Okay, one way of implementing internationalization, change language in your application is to use a library called react-i18next. And this is also specifically for React development. So I'll add the link to the description of this tutorial. But this is basically, if you go to this URL, and you will see the step-by-step installation. So first it says that we have to install the packages that we need, which is React-i18n and all of the backend stuff that we need. So I'll just copy these stuff and then go back to my terminal and try to install it. So if I go ahead and I ran these commands, and then I think we need to install the two other libraries that are listed, and these are for backend. If we have some backend basically languages that are listed in our backend side, we can just use these two libraries. So I added just in case if for your project you need it, so we can have it right here. So what is the next step? That's the step-by-step that we are going over. The next step is to configure i18next. So basically we have to create a file, i18n.js, next to the index.js file. For us it's TypeScript, so it will be TS instead of JS. And we copy paste this file there. So let's do the same. I will, and this is my root directory, and this is src, and next to the index it says we have to implement the i18next. So let's copy and paste, or we can create a new file. I already have a file, which is this one, so I can just paste it here. And as you can see, this is, let me zoom in a little bit. I literally copy paste whatever we have in the documentation here into this file, and no change. I did not change anything here. So let's go back and see what is the next step. And now inside of the root folder index.js, we have to import this i18n. So that's one line that we have to add inside of our index.js. So let's go back to the application and go here, and we can add that line. So let me add it right here. I'm copying and pasting right here. So making sure that it is already in the same path. So I use the relative path. So okay. So it seems like it's the right path. So that's the next, yeah, zoom it in. That's all I did. I just imported the i18n file that we just added to the directory. So let's see what is the next step. Now we should be able to use our application. So one more step is for the time that we are getting the translation from backend or API call, and what is the fallback for it. So before we receive the translation, what do we show to the user? So that's for the time that we have some backend call. So it says we have to wrap our component with this tag suspense, and we can do the same thing. So okay, as you can see, the documentation mentions that we can wrap the suspense around the component. But since this is a translation and the whole application should be translated, we can wrap it around our app, which is in the index.tsx, the main part of our application. So I can just put suspense, basically whatever we have in the documentation, I can just copy paste it here and move it to our application. So I add it here, and I have to close the suspense tab. And don't forget to import it. So if you see, import is from the React. So I can just go back and import it for React. So now that's all. That's all we need to do to make sure that all this line is doing is, if we call the backend to get the translation, it will load this part, which is just text, but you can just add more complex view here. You can pass the whole component here. And but for the sake of simplicity of this application, I just add one text, but you can just pass a component here. So it just adds that component while we are receiving the translation from the backend. That's all it does. So what is the next step? We have to create our translation files into this path. As you can see, it says it should be in a public folder, and it should be a folder called locales, and then the language code, and inside of language code we should have a translation.json. So let's do that. This is our root folder, and we have a public folder. It says we have to create a new folder inside of here. It says new, and it should call locales. And then inside of this locale, we should add the language code. So the language code, for example, for English is EN. So I will create a folder called EN inside of here. And also there should be one object, which is translation.json. So I can just create a new file here, right inside of this EN, and call it file translation.json. Currently it's empty. So what do we put in it? We should put a key and value that we want for translation. So the example that I have in mind, I want to put these translations. So this is the sample code that you see on this website, but I would like to use a different but very similar okay, so yeah, something like this. So I have a home page, and inside a home page I have title, description, part 1 and part 2. So this is one language that we have. So we need to define another language. So exactly like English, I want to add a new language. So I add a new directory, and I have a Farsi language. This is the language code, and I should create a new translation.json file. So I can just copy this one and paste it here, but I have to change the content and basically use a different language for this one. So I can just copy paste it from the other file that I have and save it. As you can see, the keys are the same, but the translation, the values are different. So that's how we set up our application for i18next. And let's see if there is anything that we are missing. Basically, it's talking about the use case of it and how we can use it, which I explain more in detail. So that's all for set up the i18next React. Now we will go ahead and start building our application and try to see how we can use i18next. Okay, now let's try to build the view that we see here. So we have two texts here. So let's add these two texts, and this is the home page. So we can add these texts into our home page. So where our home page inside of the application. So if you're watched the tutorials that we had for React development, you know that the basic structure of our application. If you have not watched it, I will highly recommend to go over and watch it again. So I have home page, which is currently empty and blank screen. So I can just add the text like the one that we have inside of the view that we just viewed. So I can just add these two texts. One of them is heading, and the other one is div with font size different. So if I want to cheat and add something like that, I can just first add a div, and since it's a home page, I gave it a class name homepage, and I can just go ahead and add the h and also the div for the view. So these two, and I can close the div. So basically, currently it's still empty. I should put the text inside of here, the title that I need to show up on the screen. But for now, that's the view that we have for these texts. Currently, it's removed because I don't have any text inside of it, but I can add the text back. And so let's do the text inside of it. So for the heading, I have welcome to React, something like this. And for the part 2, I can just add this to the description, and that's it. So that's all for this. We need to give it some style, so I'll add the style to this style file. So as you can see, this is style and home style. Currently it's empty, but I'll give it some style. What style we need to make sure that it is in the center of the screen. So I will add the style to make it in center. So let me copy paste it here. So I have the homepage class name, and we have the title, which is the class name title here, and it's basically doing the center. So it makes it in center, and that's all. So from the view, now we need the this part left. So let's build this part. Don't forget to import your CSS file, because if you look at your application, it will look like this. It's not in center. So in order to make it center and apply your CSS, you have to import your CSS file. So save it, and then you'll see it's in the middle. Now the last part that we have to add to the view is the drop down. Basically, the thing that we see here, it's nothing but a drop down. So when I click on it, this drop down will show up, and we will use Bootstrap. We had a session how to install Bootstrap, React Bootstrap, and this is a drop down menu and a drop down item that we can just copy paste inside our application and use. Before adding the drop down in our code, we just want to double check where we want to add it. I'm planning to add the button here, so it should be somewhere above this text. So it should be basically here. I can go ahead and add the code here, but if you think about it, since we can break it down into a different component, how about just create a new component and add it there, and we can just call that component from here. So I can just go ahead and create a new component, and since it's a shared component and we can use this component maybe later, I can just call shared component, and inside of the shared components I can just add a new component called language, change language, or language picker. So we have a folder called language picker. Now we can just add our JSX file, or with the folder, not new TypeScript and JSX language picker. Okay, so we add a new file. Let's zoom in a little bit. So how do we want to add a new component? It should be very simple. We first import React, and now we should know how to do that. Again, if you want to see how we create the functional component, you can go and watch the first season of tutorial, and at the end we can just go ahead and export it. So that's all we need to do. So we can just go ahead and use this component inside of our home page here. As I mentioned, we want to put it here and close it here. So remember that this is auto importing. Make sure that you import it and you can use it. It doesn't show anything here inside of our view because we did not put anything in language picker. It returns nothing. That's why it didn't change anything. Now we have to add our logic here. So we can get the bootstrap content, the drop down menu that we talked, and add it in our return statement. So where was the bootstrap? So it was right here, this code. I modified the drop down items inside of here and added the languages that I want to show up in the view, and it looks like this. So we have one parent component, parent div. I gave it a name, language picker, the class name, and then drop down button, exactly like what we have here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Drop down menu. Drop down buttons. Yeah, drop down button. So this is drop down button, and inside of it drop down item. Yeah, this is exactly like the bootstrap that we have. And instead of items, the text inside of it I modified and put whatever I want. Now it's complaining because we have not imported these items, so I can just simply do the auto import. So, and I can just do the import of drop down as well. I just imported the drop down button and import this one, and that if you run the application, you will see that the buttons here, it has some background. If you notice, it's different from white. Also, it has this icon which I don't like, and the width of the items are a little bit bigger. So I would like to change this stuff. I will save you some time and add some CSS file and come back, and you will see some time. And that's all I did. I created the styles folder under the language picker, and I added this language picker.scss. And what I have here, I can just open the file. There's some bunch of CSS that you can see that I applied, and it will look like this. So when you hover over it, it has some different action. It changed the width and all of this stuff. So, but these buttons doesn't do anything. Let's add some functionality for this. In order to give functionality to the buttons, we have to add some on-click handler. So these are the items. So for each of them, I will put on-click handler, and I'll define a function which is handle language change, and we can just call this function. And the same thing for here, on-click sorry, if I can type on-click, and this one. So what is it? It's just basically a function that calls our function with what? We should pass the language that we want to have. For example, for this one, it's FA or Farsi. And for this one, we have the same thing. It passes EN. So whenever the user clicks on this item, it calls this function with this argument. So what is this function? We have to define it right here. So we can define it like const and this function, and it's equal, it gets the parameter since we passed all of the TypeScript, so we can just give it a type which is language, and the type is a string because we passed the string from here. And what does it do? So we can just check the documentation of i18next for React, and you will see there is a hook for this translation. So we can use that hook and define it right here. And if I hover over it, you have to import it as well. So I can just manually import it. So basically, you can import use translation from react-i18next. And how does it work? You can just call it from our function, and there's a function that it has inside of it, and it changes the language, and we can pass the language what we received from this function. So I can just save this. So let's see what is wrong with this one. Okay, so I had a missed type. Okay, the last part that we need to do to make the drop-down working is to go back to our home page and remove this hard-coded text. Currently it's hard-coded. So what should we do instead? We should use the files that we added right in public folder. So if you remember, we added these locales and added these items. So we need to use these. How do we use it? So again, there is a hook, React hook for it. So we can define it right here. And this use translation is again coming from i18next, something like this. And this time you extract the T. And what do we do with this T? We can go ahead and remove this hard-coded text, and instead we can just use T and give it the key that we define inside of our JSON file. So for example, the JSON file that we have home page and then .title. I can go ahead and show you one more time. In English, we have translation, and as you can see, it have homepage and then title. So you can access them with dot notation. So if I go back to the homepage, I use T and then homepage dot title. So I can use the same thing for description. So I use the description second, part 2 of description. So I can just remove this hard-coded text and add this. It goes to the homepage description part 2. If I go to here, it says homepage description and then part 2. So you should load this one. I save it and then go to my application and I click on Farsi. It translates to Farsi. I click on English again. If I click, it will change it to English. One issue that you see here, although I changed the language, it doesn't change the flag. How do I fix it? We can just set the state. So if you go to the language picker, we can just define a state like language, and then use it here, because this is the part that it shows the flag. This title is responsible showing the flag. So we can make this one dynamic, that based on the selection it shows the flag here. So how do we do that? We can just use the set state or use state, and we learned about these use state in previous tutorials. You can go back and watch it. So I define this language. I can just create a new variable based on this language and define a flag. So I can say, if you see the language is doing something, const flag, and I say if the language is equal FA or Farsi, what do? I will load the flag of Farsi language, and if not, in this case, I'm using ternary operator. So if not, use the US flag. And then I can pass this flag to this title, so it will be dynamic. And one more step is to, whenever they select the language, we have to change the state or set the language. So it's very easy. We can just set the language to the lang, and it will change for us. So now if I refresh the page, so if I select Farsi, it goes back to this flag, and then in English goes back to US flag. So one more thing that we need to take care is, for example, if I select Farsi and then refresh the page, you see the flag got reset, but my text didn't reset. How do I fix this? So I don't like it that if I refresh the page, I want to go back to the initial settings of my website. How do I do that? So I can just add a use effect for the entire app. So if I go to the app, which is here, TSX, which we define all of the routes here, and we can just reset the language every time user do the refresh or this view gets load. So how do we do that? We can definitely use a simple logic here. So first we use this React hooks, and I can just import it manually, and then we can use effect. So basically I can say use effect, and if you're not familiar with use effect, I highly suggest to go back and watch the previous tutorials about use effects and what is it good for, and you can just import it as well. First it is in React, so now it's not complaining. And as you better know, for view did load, if you have an empty item here, it will just load it one time, and then I can just call this function that we are familiar with. We change the language every time that view loads, a component did mount, and the component is basically the whole entire app. That's why I added in this file. So every time that we load the app, it will reset to the English language. So if I save it and go back to our application, refresh it, and I change the language to Farsi, and when I refresh the page, you see that it goes back to the English. That's all for changing the language, and I hope you learned how you can define a language. You can for sure add as much as language as you want. You can just go ahead and create different language here, different folders based on the language code, and you can add it to your application. I hope you liked it. Please like, share, comment, and add anything you want to learn for React, and I will consider it. Thank you.